Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. I'm going to be reading you a ghost story by James Hopper. The Caudrys had been in the settlement only a few months, and of evenings sometimes they would feel lonely. This was because they were from the East and had lived most of their lives in the great stone cities with millions of people ever about them, while now their rustic cottage, bungalow it was called, in this land, stood frail and solitary in a pine forest by the shore of an immense ocean. True, only 5 miles away was a very live little town, but these 5 miles were over a hill as high almost as a mountain, along a winding road skirting canyons, between high dark trees, and then that town was 250 miles from the nearest city. And that city days and days, mountains and plains away from the real world they had known. So sitting in that evening with small Claire playing on the carpet between them, they could see the cottage all too clearly, frail and alone in the pines, by the great sea, so far from the nearest town, in turn so far from the real world. A weight of loneliness fell upon them, and they would be apt to say, "Let's go over to the Burtons for a minute. What do you say?" They would then look at each other in dim hesitation, while little Clara, after one quick upward glance, resumed her playing in a slightly different manner now, with light temporary gestures, as if waiting. "Well, what do you say? Shall we go?" But they still hesitated, although, as in the great stillness the child played so like a candle flame, they had come to one of those almost unbearable moments over there at the Burtons. It would be different. You did not hear yourself so much over there. You did not feel yourself so much. Young Burton, his cottage was not a place in solitude at the confines of the earth. He worked in the small town 5 miles away, and his cottage to him was a tight and cozy little suburban home for himself and his young wife. And a suburban home it was like, built as if on a 30-foot lot, instead of a spot in the wilderness with thousands of free miles on all sides, and resolutely urbane, plastered, with tight windows compact, the kitchen a kitchenette. Passing from here to there was like passing from one sphere to another, from one a little too rarefied, of sensibilities too taut, to one a bit cheap and loud, but warm and safe. Realities are close about you there. You were safe. Even the radio, Burton's beloved radio. The radio, Caudry thought, that incredible thing. A sound was sent out at one end far, far, far. It was killed. It was transformed. It was etherealized. It became a ghost. Across over the land far, 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 through the clear, high air, athwart the stars, it winged a ghost. It arrived, presto. It was materialized. It became sound again. The trouble was that this sound would be crazy music or sickly ukulele strains, or the politicians talking. "I take pleasure in presenting tonight one of this nation's most stirring Democrats." Yap, yap, yap. Wow, wow, wow. Young Burton, he was a radio fan. His radio was always going. When you called all the time, it kept going. It would be playing music, or "I take the greatest pleasure in presenting." Never mind. A good place to go to when this silence came. This silence in this room, and small Clara playing with her precious little things. Playing so quietly in the silence. How slender and white she was. A little white flame. "Well, shall we go?" The mother sprang to her feet. "Yes, let's go." "I'm going to take my toys," said Clara. She was gathering them up, as though the river were rising, as the inundation threatened. "All my little precious things," she said. These were little chairs, little tables, little beds, a little lamp, a little motor car, a little gramophone, tiny dwarfish toys from Japan. As she played with them, one had an eerie feeling. She had slipped off into another world entirely. A little, delicate, gnomish world, out of this one of gross things. "I'll take Madge, too," she said. "And that bad cat." Misericórdias. She held them with her folded arms against her little body and went out first as they closed the door behind. The way was along a dim road beneath the pines, with here and there a bluish splash from the setting crescent moon. Soon the Burtons' house showed, all compact, all lit up. Yes, Caudry, the radio is going. Before they entered, they could see, through the living room window, Burton and his young wife sitting there playing cards, with the radio horn turned upon them, flooding them. There were cries, scrapings of chairs. What simple, sincere, warm folk, the Burtons. How true their welcome, the liking you felt beneath. We've just dropped in for a minute, cried the Caudrys. But in every posture and every gesture, the Burtons said, you can stay forever. Forever, sang the radio. Forever. For the course of the radio was still going, naturally, since the Burtons were radio mad. Small Claire was already installed, in the carpet absorbed in her eerie, minute toys. It was as if she had not moved, as if she were still at the other house. The others sat about her in their chairs. What a little white flame she was! But it was better here in this house. Even the vulgarity helped, and Burton's over-rotund cordiality. Even the yelping radio. Over there in that other house, all alone, they got, well, it was a bit maudlin. That plain of tenderness for the child, the uneasiness, almost morbid it was. Burton was having trouble with the radio. He kept rising and going to it. He kept turning metal knobs. It isn't going very well tonight, he apologized. The radio was his child. Interference, he grandly and vaguely explained. Static, he announced. Suddenly a thin, sweet strain came floating into the room. Violin, thought Caudry. Martini's pastoral. Martini's Padre Martini. The priest, musician, 17th century. But the violinist, where was he, miles and miles away? Was not of the first order. He sentimentalized. He forced heavy sobs into the frail, fine, wistful music. Imagine, thought Caudry, the Padre's soul in the ether, spread out thin and sentiment throughout the ether, and that coming through it, his own song, played like that, tearing through it, through his soul. He must suffer. Went the radio. A sort of terrific dry roar, cutting like a buzzsaw through the slender music, and then again, as if some great sidereal beast were snarling in the great void. Burton shook his head in concern. Again, several times, came the heavy, brutal interruptions, which somehow left them all tense, with tight nerves. Tremendously dramatic, Caudry thought. It's the fleet, said Burton, the war fleet on maneuvers. They're going out of San Francisco tonight. They use those big currents, tear the deuce out of ours. And sitting there, they all saw, far off, yet close at hand, the big steel hulls noising out of the Golden Gate into the dark, limitless sea, signaling imperiously to each other. Where are you? Here, here. Where? Here, here. And you, where? Speak, I say, where? Here, can't you hear? Here, here. Their voices were of steel. They tore the gentle Padre's music to bleeding tatters. It's the fleet, Burton repeated, the war fleet, putting out to sea. They use those big currents, gee, they certainly rip things up. But just then the radio went dead. The gentle music ceased, and the savage interruptions, both at once, in a silence that seemed stunningly complete. What the deuce? Said Burton, with the effect of one speaking suddenly in the dark. He rose, turned knobs, adjusted wires, but no sound came from the box, not a rustle, not a sigh. He gave it up. Can you beat it? She's gone dead on me, absolutely dead. But he could not believe it. He was up again, turning knobs, trying adjustments. Once more he sat down, baffled. No, she's dead, he said. By golly, she is absolutely dead. But now the little girl who, all the time had played on the carpet, absorbed in her eerie little toys, froze to immobility and seemed to give ear. She rose and with 3 dancing steps was at the radio. "Yes?" she hallooed softly. "Yes?" Then, "Yes, I'm here. Yes, I hear." "Claire," her mother said, "stop that, stop that. You know you are hearing nothing. Stop it." "Yes," chimed Caudry, a strange prickly feeling along his spine. "Come here, Claire." But the child, still poised, still gave ear. "Oh, yes," she cried. "Yes, yes, yes. That's very nice. Oh, I'm glad. Yes, I will. Sometime I will. Yes." She listened a moment longer, gave 3 serious little nods, then a bit languidly came back to her toys, slipped to the carpet, and was playing again. There was a long silence. Each in the room formulated in his mind a sentence which somehow he or she did not pronounce. Maybe there was a murmur in the radio, Burton thought. Children's ears are very sharp. What a little actress, thought Mrs. Barton. Almost scared me to death. But Helen Caudry's unspoken thoughts was a turbulent question, which beat in rhythm with her heart. What was it? What was it, dear? What was it? What was it? What was it? When the Caudrys started homewards, the moon had set. The night was dark, but the stars shone bright through the trees. Claire walked along for a little while, and then she stopped in a manner her father well knew. "Want to be carried, sweet?" And without waiting for the answer, he stooped and raised her in his arms. Up there, drooping a little, her flower face in his neck, she grew confidential. "Would you like to know who talked to me on the radio, Daddy?" she whispered. "Yes, who was it?" "He was a little boy, far, far off. He said, 'I see you, Claire.' He said, 'Claire, do you hear me?' I said, 'Yes, yes.' He said, 'Little Claire, I love you.' I said, 'That's very nice.' He said, 'Sometime may I come to you?' And I said, 'Yes, yes.' Wasn't that nice, Daddy?" "Who was the little boy?" he said, meaning it with playful, but finding his throat absurdly tight. "A little boy away off, in a star. That star, Daddy." In the darkness, he could see her finger raised with its baby crook towards a star a bit red in the center of a clearing of the trees. When they reached the cottage door, the child had gone to sleep, lax like a cold flower across his shoulder, and the mother eagerly whispered, "What star was that, John?" He gave a short laugh. Not a bad choice for a chance shot. It was Mars. The mother began to tremble. "John, you don't think there can be anything like that, do you, John? It's just her play, isn't it? There can't be anything like that, can there?" "Why, of course not. Why, you poor thing, all a tremble. Why, of course not. What nonsense." But something with him, mutely, was booming. "What do you know? What do you know?" "We know nothing. We know nothing. Anything is possible. Anything." "I'm frightened, John. It's foolish, but I'm frightened. Tell me again, there couldn't be anything like that, could there? A something somewhere that would want her. Oh, John, I'm so frightened." He made his voice deep with reassurance. "Of course not. Of course not." The door was now open. He switched on the lights. As they went in, the darkness, how silly people got in the darkness. Here it was, all golden glow. He carried the child across the living room to her small chamber, dropped her to the bed. Together they put her in bed and kissed her good night, kissed the dim, far murmuring good night on her own little lips. But if the child slept, they too now could not sleep. As they lay there in the darkness, every now and then he could feel her leave her bed. He would divine her whiteness slipping across to the little girl's room. He would strain. listening as she was in there. His heart would extravagantly ease as she returned. "Why do you do that?" he said at length. "You mustn't do that. Why do you do that?" She murmured, "I can't help it. I'm afraid." "When you go in there, she's always there, isn't she? She's never gone, is she? She's always there. Then why do you do it? She's always there, isn't she?" But she whispered so low that she seemed to have sunk beneath the ground. Oh, John, suppose in the morning when we went to look, she shouldn't." And by the sudden aching jump his heart gave, he knew that fear had been steeping in him too. But this was intolerable and mad. "Come," he said, "let's get up. Let's get out of this." They rose and went into the living room and flashed up all the lights. He drew in some wood from the pile outside and made a fire on the hearth. She got the coffee pot and placed its round cheek against the fire. There they sat as the night ticked by before the fire. He tormented it with his poker. She poured coffee in cups. There they sat doing those things, but especially listening to the light breathing that came in from the little back room, with its door open upon the big lighted one. Once they relaxed, the mother looked at him, saw herself. She smiled. "You would think," she said, "we were watching over someone ill." "Yes," he said, "we're utterly foolish." "You know what we are doing, don't you?" he said after a moment. "Well, we are sitting here guarding her from a small boy on Mars." "We're mad," she said, almost laughing. "Altogether," he agreed. And then their hearts abruptly froze. Claire was speaking, there within that little black room. "Yes, little boy. Yes, yes." And then, "No, little boy. Oh, no, not this time." The mother sprang to her feet and rushed into the room, but Caudry remained where he was, plastered. She returned. "She has been dreaming," she said. She had tossed herself nearly out of bed. I tucked her in. She's sleeping. The night went on as before. They replenished the fire. They stirred it. They said a few words now and then, but always they listened. Finally, they became conscious of the fact that their weary eyes were staring at windows white with dawn. They rose and shook themselves. They looked at each other's pale, lined faces and smiled. "What a night! Perfectly mad we are." When later Caudry set out with his canvases for the round beach, little Claire thought she would go along a ways. "I'll walk a little ways with you along the trail, Father," she said. "I'll be right back, Mother." They went down the winding path through the chaparral of wild lilacs and old man. When it had become quite secluded and wild, the little girl spoke. "You know, Daddy, the little boy that spoke to me in the radio last night? The one who lives so far in a star?" "Yes, well?" "He came for me last night, Daddy, but I couldn't go with him, not yet. I said I wanted to stay with you and Mama. And you know Sleepy Eyes, the mother cat? The other day she ran up and down the trees, and then she came back to her kittens, and her fur was all sweet with this." She crushed a fragrant leaf between her little fingers and gave it to her father. "We'll never know," he was thinking. "We'll never surely know. The reality and the dream, it's almost one with a child, the real and the make-believe. They merge. We'll never know. We'll never be sure." And that night, as they sat against the cottage and watched small Claire playing at their feet, and once more the strange dolorous tenderness swelled their hearts, he said, "You know, we should go back to the big city. We are becoming absurd here." "Oh, yes, let's go back to the big cities," she cried and sprang to her feet. She could see great stone houses, thousands and thousands of them. They made great walls, they shielded. They were great barricades, and people, millions and millions. On all sides, tight guarding armies, walls and people impenetrable. You felt safe. Out here, you were on the verge, on the verge. Oh, yes, she cried. Let us go back to the cities. The end. I hope you enjoyed that story. It wasn't too frightening, was it? And join me here on Sunday for a religious story, and then Wednesday again for another mystery or a ghost story, whatever I can find. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.